Alright guys, so I'm going to try to do a Q2 wrap up, which is April, May, and June. But unfortunately, what happened, or fortunately, I don't know. I mean, school got let out and I just started reading like a lot. So in total, in April, May, and June, I read 78 books. So this is just going to be really rapid fire, as these often are, because they often get too long. My camera overheats like twice. It's a good time. So in April, I read 26 books, and I started off with the final book in the Bailey Brothers series by Claire Kingsley. And this is a series about a number of brothers in a small town who find their wives through a variety of really cute, like meet cutes or other weird situations. It's been really adorable so far, and what I liked about the last book was that it really brought together a lot of the feuding family small town stuff and like a true Romeo and Juliet with a happy ending. So it was cute. That series is not much to write home about, but I do enjoy Claire Kingsley as a writer, and so it's good. I then read The Wedding Crasher by Mia Sosa. Last year, I believe, Mia Sosa published The Worst Best Man, and I have read both of those. I did an ARC review of The Wedding Crasher. I enjoyed it. It was a fairly standard book for me. A lot of really great family stuff, but I did a whole ARC review of that, so if you want to know more, you can watch that. Then I read the Lineup series by Misty Murphy. That was I Dare You, The Fourth Guy, The F Word, Breaking the Bro Code, and Hate You More. Standard Kindle Unlimited contemporary romances that are connected. That's it. That's it for them. They're not anything to write home about either. I just read them all. I then read The Last Slave Ship, The True Story of How Clotilda Was Found, Her Descendants, and an Extraordinary Reckoning by Ben Raines. This is a story about exactly what the title tells you, and I covered this further in a supplementals episode. However, what I will say is that it's a very fast read. I found some of the pacing and some of what was included to be a little bit uneven, but I really enjoyed listening to the history, learning about the Clotilda and her descendants, and also I watched a National Geographic documentary on Disney Plus in tandem with it and got to see some of this stuff. So if you are into both American history, our reckoning with slavery, and just archaeology in general, it's a really interesting story. I then read most of the books in the Price Family series by Nadia Lee. Number one is 4 Weeks Till Forever. Number 2 is A Billionaire's Inconvenient Obsession. Number 3 is The Billionaire's Secret Wife. I skipped 4, and then I read 5, which is The Billionaire's Forbidden Desire, and 6, The Billionaire's Holiday Bride. I just didn't read them in that order. I started with The Billionaire's Forbidden Desire, which was a really interesting, I don't want to say second chance, but like story of love and redemption, which I really enjoyed. And I thought, I mean, it's not like great, but I really enjoyed that. And it was the 5th book in this series. And so I thought, oh, I'll read the rest of them. And unfortunately, none of them ever got to the level of the one I had already read. So I put myself through a couple more of them and then just went, I don't need to continue this. So I liked that one, and that was again The Billionaire's Forbidden Desire, but other than that, it was pretty bleh. The Secret by Max Monroe is what I read after that. I have been waiting for this to come out, and it is a series of stories about brothers who went to a fortune teller at one point, and the fortune teller kind of told them how their love lives would go, and each one of them is like filling out the prophecy, but they've been really cute so far. Each of the brothers has a really great personality, and while, I mean, again, they might not be enough for me to say do a full review of, I really like this series. I quite like Max Monroe. The 4th book is still to come, and I'm very excited about that, so it's not done yet. But again, it's just, again, standard contemporary romances with a Sunni set of brothers. And out of all of the ones I've mentioned so far, if you were gonna like need something to fill your time, I'd recommend this one, but it's not finished. And again, they're all standalone, but like, I want to know how it all resolves. I then finally finished, after what felt like months of waiting for my library hold to renew, The Last King of America, The Misunderstood Reign of George III by Andrew Robert. Again, I spoke about this longer in a supplementals video, but this was a very long biography of King George III, who was the King of Britain when America fought the American Revolution and became its own country. But Andrew Robert literally, I feel like, wrote this book because he was upset that Americans have the Hamilton idea of George III. And so while this covers his entire reign, it felt like the portions that Robert was really invested in were the parts concerning America. So I don't know if it's kind of worth reading the whole thing. It was interesting. I learned a lot of stuff, but it definitely felt uneven in care. I then also finished Chasing History, A Kid in the Newsroom by Carl Bernstein. This is a memoir by Carl Bernstein. If that name sounds familiar, it's half of Woodward and Bernstein, the guys that broke the Watergate stories for the Washington Post. I took this up on a whim, and I was really, really fascinated to find that even though I am not particularly interested in journalism, like as a career, like I respect journalists, but I don't necessarily know much about the process or the profession, that there's something about this book that made Bernstein's love of journalism really infectious. And also he was really at the forefront of a lot of really interesting events in the 60s. So I enjoyed the history, but really it was just the passion for journalism that came through. So, I mean, if you're a fan of the profession, you should definitely read it. But even if you're not, it's just a really good memoir in that sense. I finished off this month with a 5-star book read that was Book Lovers by Emily Henry. I talked about this both in my ARC review and then also in my mid-year book tag, so I'm sorry if you've heard this one before. This book just filled me with joy as a reading experience. It might not be the best thing ever written. I didn't really care, because I feel like when you get those books that just fill you with joy and make you just genuinely happy, like that's what particularly like a romance novel should really set out to do. And I felt like that was really accomplished with Book Lovers. It's a very cute enemies to lovers, all of the bookish jokes, all of the bookish puns. The two main characters are book editors who are kind of having a feud with each other and end up in a small town together. So it was just cute and sweet, and I loved it, and you can see my review for more. And that was really fast way to get through 26 books. We're gonna have to keep on going. For May was 28 books that I read. It's actually my high water month mark so far. So here we go. I started with Funny You Should Ask by Alyssa Sussman. I've been seeing this get some good press recently, and that makes me wonder if I should have reviewed it. I took it on because it is a second chance romance novel about a reporter and an actor, and 10 years ago they had a thing when she went to interview him. It turned out to be the interview that made her career, but they haven't spoken in 10 years, and now both of their lives are very different and they are meeting up for a follow-up interview. There's a lot of flashback work in this one, and I don't know, there was something about it that just never sat with me. And I don't mean like the content was bad or it was poorly written, but I just like never really connected with the characters, and I really wanted it to work, and just for me it never did. But like not in the way where I was like disappointed, just in the way where I was like, oh, fine, and then I went on and read the next thing. I then did read and review an arc of Set on You by Amy Leah. This is about a romance novel about a plus size fitstagrammer or Instagram fitness guru, I suppose, who falls in love with a very fit gentleman. I have a lot to say in my ARC review of that. Basically, it's just that some of the way that her character was written as she was dealing with her body issues just didn't sit well with my experience as someone who has had eating problems in the past and has struggled with my body image in some very negative ways. I have seen some people who find it very inspirational, and you know, to every book there is a reader. It just didn't work for me. I then read most of the Pierce family series by Crystal Caswell. This is Broken Beast, Playboy Prince, and Ruthless Rival. I actually started with Ruthless Rival because it was a second chance romance. Those are just my thing right now. And then I went back for Broken Beast, which is almost kind of like a esque Beauty and the Beast kind of thing. And then Playboy Prince is essentially what it is. These were fine. I did not continue and read the fifth or the fourth book in this series. They're just like solid, again, 3-star books for just like mindless filler. I think out of all of them, I did end up liking Ruthless Rival the most because it was a trope I was interested in, and the other two weren't that. Again, I have nothing against them. I just also have nothing like particularly like to say about them either. I then read and reviewed an arc of Something Wilder by Christina Lauren. This is the newest book by an author, it's actually 2 people, but by an author that I adore. This book is a second chance romance set out west during a treasure hunt that kind of starts to feel like Western Bandits National Treasure with a romance on the side. So while I could have done with a lot more of the romance being a focus of it, I actually didn't end up caring as much in the end because I love National Treasure and I love like scavenger hunts and logic puzzles and treasure hunts and all that kind of stuff. And this one also had some serious consequences, like it was not all fun and games. So even though the romance wasn't a huge feature of it, I actually really enjoyed it. But you can check out my review for more on that if you want it. I then read with Michaela Iron Widow by Jiren J. Zhao. This is a young adult sci-fi slash fantasy. Essentially, this is a world that for anyone like me who grew up watching like Gundam or Zoid anime just kind of felt really amazing. In this world, there are mechs that are operated by men who use women as concubines, and the main character's sister was killed with her energy was sapped by one of these mech drivers or whatever, pilots, and so she goes after him for revenge, and it turns out that she's actually incredibly powerful. She gets partnered with another loose cannon dude, and they both fall in love with a guy from her past, which is a legitimate love triangle slash poly relationship in a YA novel. The thing about this one is that the pacing is absolutely bananas, and Michaela and I were both just kind of flabbergasted by it, but other than that, it's a really good book, and we look forward to the second one. If you want to hear us extrapolate on that and other stuff, you can watch our review. I then read, and I kid you not, 10 books basically in a row by Beck McMaster. So there's 10 books that are connected, but there's 2 series of 5 in her London Steampunk / London Steampunk : Blue Blood Conspiracy series. So those were in the first 5 books, the London Steampunk series, Kiss of Steel, Heart of Iron, My Lady Quicksilver, Forged by Desire, and Of Silk and Steam. Those were followed by London Steampunk : The Blue Blood Conspiracy, which was Mission Improper, The Man Who Loved Me, You Only Live Twice, To Catch a Rogue, and Dukes Are Forever. I have a lot to say about this series to the point where I did an entire 10-book review of them, but what they are in general is steampunk books, obviously, with paranormal elements. So there's vampires, there's werewolves, and there is a lot of politics and some really great adventure storylines. I think the best thing about them is that they get better as the series goes on, like exponentially. Some of the issues that I had in the first 5 were totally fixed in the second 5, and it was so wonderful to see that kind of progression with really interesting, funny characters, good romance, and these plots that really expanded and connected and just really introduced me to a world that I fell in love with. So if you need some paranormal steampunk romance, you can start with the first 5. I think you get more out of the last 5 if you do that, but you don't have to necessarily. But the last 5 are definitely exponentially better writing-wise. I then read Looking for the Good War, American Amnesia and the Violent Pursuit of Happiness by Elizabeth Samet. This I thought would be World War II cultural history, meaning how we have culturally interpreted World War II since we fought it. It is that, but it's also like a lot of movie reviews. This focuses a lot on cinema, and so it's very interesting. This is in the nonfiction book where you get some chapters that are really excellent cultural critique. And then to me, it just felt like you also got chapters that were just movie review after movie review after movie review. And I was like, I get it. I get that this is your evidence, but like, So I really enjoyed it, but I think I would have enjoyed it more if I cared about cinema or film criticism, which I don't care as much about. So I definitely tuned in and out of that one a lot, but I did talk about it more in a supplemental episode if you would like to watch that. Then I read The Singles Table by Sarah Desai. I have really enjoyed this series so far. The Singles Table, I thought that I would do a review of it, and then when I finished it, it's so hard. You can't do reviews of books that you like enjoy but don't have strong feelings about in any particular way, right? It's basically impossible. And so for The Singles Table, for me, I think the only thing I have to say is I felt like the female main character was really over the top. This was two people, like an opposites attract, kind of doing the fake dating thing to get the aunties off their backs and then falling in love. So like slightly enemies to lovers. I don't know, it was fine. I enjoyed it. I have nothing poor to say about it. I then read 3 more books by Beck McMaster, which I haven't reviewed. This was the Dark Court Rising series, so that's Promise of Darkness, Crown of Darkness, and Curse of Darkness. This was an excellent fantasy series, loosely based on the Hades and Persephone myth. It was a really excellent fantasy world, and it was the same thing, the writing that was really good in the London Blue Blood Steampunk series was carried over, and I think made a very rich fantasy world. The world building here obviously had to be a little bit deeper, and it was very strong. These are her newest books. I didn't want to review the series so soon after having done 10 of her books, but I also highly recommend these, especially if you're looking for something Hades and Persephone adjacent, but not like another retelling or something. These were just really good, and I really like Beck McMaster, okay? I said that in my mid-year book tag, and I'll say it again. So after that, I had more luck with some fantasy romance that I was reading. I read the Bridge Kingdom duology by Danielle Jensen. That's the Bridge Kingdom and the Traitor Queen. I also talked about this series in my mid-year book tag because essentially what happens in these is there is Laura, the main character, who is raised as a princess of one kingdom. She is raised very ruthlessly to be married to the king of the Bridge Kingdom, infiltrate his court, and help her father invade and bring this kingdom down. And so, of course, you know, she begins to realize that the things that her father has told her are not necessarily true, and falls in love with the guy she's married. But what was really excellent about this series is I feel like sometimes with, like, she comes in to be a traitor, they kind of yada yada away that fact a little bit, and it's like just fine that she came in to totally betray all of these people. And you got that with the second book title, The Traitor Queen. This series really deals with that, the fallout of that, and the emotional fallout of that as well, not just the political one. So I enjoyed it. I know that there are more books following different pairs coming out now. I haven't read them. I kind of think I'll wait for a little bit because this was just a really good 2 books. I then finished Lies My Teacher Told Me, Everything Your American History Textbook Got Wrong by James Lowen. I've talked about this book ad nauseum, I feel like. It was in one of my hauls. It was in my mid-year book tag. I put it in a supplemental. This is potentially going to be just the best book that I've read this year, particularly for my PhD studies in history. Lowen looked at American history textbooks and basically poked holes in all of the ways that they either mistold American history or outright lied. He has the receipts in primary source documents. He has cultural analysis of why these things happened. And also in the newest edition, you know, he did a update 10 years later, so how some of these books had shifted and how they hadn't. I think it's an incredible book, and you can check it out in one of my supplementals if you're interested for more. Then I also finished Jesus and John Wayne, How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation by Kristen Kobes-Dumez. I'm doing a independent study slash project with a friend this summer looking at trends in evangelical Christian books for children, and so we're also trying to do some reading around that. Again, did this in the same supplemental that I talked about, Lies My Teacher Told Me. I found this book interesting. I just found it really fast. I'm definitely getting to the point where I really want my nonfiction books to be very heavy on the details, because when you make sweeping statements or generalizations, I'm like, oh, but I want like the footnote for that, or I want like expand on that a little bit more. And so while I feel like this did an incredible job, I don't think it's a bad book, at putting a lot of stuff in context very quickly over the course of a number of years. I definitely wanted it to go deeper, and I'm glad that we will do that with more books going forward. Finished out the month with Wicked Beauty by Katie Robert. This is the third book in the Dark Olympus series. Michaela and or I have now reviewed every book in this series so far, and we do hope to keep going because we adore it. This is her first poly book in this series, so it is a relationship between Achilles, Patroclus, and Helen, kind of Troy. That's clearly where her character gets inspiration from, but because this is a fantasy kind of sort of retelling of this mythology, she's also Zeus's sister. She goes to basically do battle for the position of Ares, and Achilles and Patroclus are also in the running for that. It's got a series of trials, right, for who's going to become Ares. It's got a great relationship, and so I think it's the best book in the series so far. And if you want to see more on Michaela and I's thoughts on that, you can watch our joint review. So now we have June, which was 24 books, and a lot of them in the beginning were by S.M. Gaither, or I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce the last name, but that's what we're going with. I kind of read these back and forth, but I started with the Shadow and Crown series, which is Song of the Marked, A Twist of the Blade, and The Call of the Void, because I love me some female assassin characters, and that's kind of sort of who the main character is in this series. The newest book just came out, and I'm in the middle of reading it right now, so I can't make a full series judgment. However, what I have read so far was really, really good. Like I said, there's a female like thief slash assassin main character in a world that's kind of bifurcated between those who have magic and those who don't. She has a really scrappy group of friends, and she ends up falling in love with the captain of the guard, who may or may not be a god in disguise. So there's a lot going on just with that. The world building in this one is really, really complicated actually, so I don't want to spend too much time describing it. As this series has progressed, I'm really appreciating how much the main character has grown, and I can't really extrapolate on that because I'll spoil stuff, but I really love the side characters. It's very politically oriented and aware that like doing some of this stuff in this kingdom is hard. Because when I started the Shadow and Crown series, there was only 3 books out and it wasn't finished, I jumped over to Gaither's previous trilogy, the Serpent and Kings trilogy, which is set in the same world but like on a different continent. And so the 3 books in that finished series are The Queen of Cursed Things, The King of Burning Skies, and The Empire of Empty Wars. And now some things in the Shadow and Crown series made sense because these characters had come back. So in that one, the female main character is a member of the Serpent clan, which was thought to have been eradicated because they had cursed like the entire continent, and they're considered bad luck and evil and all that stuff. She is kind of outed as a member of that clan and has to go on the run. She ends up befriending the current prince of the land, who should be her mortal enemy, but they end up kind of sort of working together and falling in love. Things get complicated. Again, I really enjoy the levels to these books. I think they're really good. And that one, like I said, is finished. So if you wanted to start there and see if you wanted to carry on into Shadow and Crown, which I think is even more complicated world building wise, you could start there. I then read the 4 books in the Deliciously Dark Fairy Tale series by K.F. Breen: A Ruin of Roses, A Throne of Ruin, A Kingdom of Ruin, and A Queen of Ruin. I did an entire series review of this because I think it is the spiciest series I have read so far in 2022. It's a pseudo Beauty and the Beast retelling with dragon shifters. There is a magical sickness. And also, the first time the main character ends up in the castle, she's like, yeah, there are succubi here and they make us have orgies every night. So if you don't want to be caught in a really weird orgy, stay in your room. The first book was good enough that I read the second book. The second book was more sex than plot. The third book had an incredible plot, and the fourth book kind of blew it all up for me. So I had a really incredible roller coaster of experience with this series. The spice level is like 11 of 10. 50 of 10, 100 of 10. So if that's what you need, again, it's not a poorly written series. I think it had some issues, but you know, it may be just what you need right now. All right, up next, I read Lessons from the Edge by Marie Yovanovitch. If that name sounds familiar but you don't know why, Marie Yovanovitch is our former ambassador to Ukraine, who was removed by former President Trump and then testified in his second impeachment trial. I read this kind of on a whim. I had seen a lot of really great reviews of it, but I was like, meh, memoir, like what is that gonna do for me? Marie Yovanovitch has been a State Department employee, sometimes ambassador, but not always, in many different countries in her very long career. What she manages to do in this book is wherever she's posted, she gives you a very interesting synopsis of the political situation and, you know, kind of her interpretation of it, what happened to her. And she's just really, really good at, you know, she was in London, for example, and that, like, okay, I know more about London politics, but she was also in, like, Kyrgyzstan, which I know nothing about. And I just really enjoyed going through her life, country by country, learning more about their politics and, you know, what led her to Ukraine, and of course the impeachment factors into it. But really her mission in this book is to talk about what role the US can play on the global stage and how we need to get back to that. And it was a good read, it was a fast read, and it was just very interesting geopolitically. I featured that in a supplemental, you can see more there, but if you're on the fence about that, I really enjoyed it. I think it was really well written, and I'm glad that I kind of just lucked into it. I also finished after that There Is Nothing for You Here, Finding Opportunity in the 21st Century by Fiona Hill. Fiona Hill was also someone who testified in Trump's first impeachment. She was and is a Russia expert, but that is not what this book is about. This book is about the economic parallels between the United States, Russia / the Soviet Union, and where Fiona Hill grew up. The blurb says that it will be more Russia / Soviet Union heavy than I feel the book really is. In particular, stronger parallels are made between, you know, for example, the mining towns of London and coal country Appalachia in the United States, and how just in the course of Fiona Hill's lifetime, the opportunities that she and people of her generation had have closed for other generations, and how these regions have really just gone downhill economically, and how we can take global lessons from this kind of shift or downward turn to fix not only the economic situation in the United States, but also potentially globally as well. It was really, really interesting. It is pseudo-memoir since it's based around where she grew up and where she lived, and so she does also talk about, for example, her role in the impeachment, but it's just not as heavily featured as in, say, Marie Yovanovitch's book, since that was a straight memoir. This is much more of a political science text, and despite the title, it does end with very specific calls to action and an upbeat note. But if you are looking at learning more about our economic situation over the last couple of decades from a more global perspective, it's a really interesting book. I then read An Arc of 1,000 Miles by Bridget Morrissey. This is a romance novel that focuses on two former best friends. 10 years ago, they went on a road trip that basically changed their life cross country, and they said that in 10 years they would do it again as kind of like an anniversary. Well, That road trip set off some romantic both feelings and romantic misunderstandings that caused the end of their friendship. So these two haven't spoken in 10 years until one of them shows up on the other's doorstep. His grandmother has died. That's the house at the end of the road trip, and he needs to pack up stuff, and he shows up and he's like, hey, wanna go? This book is way more relationship centric than I really like my romance novels, and that might seem silly, but I really like romance novels that have a good group of secondary characters, some emotional, maybe family or friend stuff, just kind of showing the two people in the center relationship as individual people who grow outside of the relationship. This book doesn't have a lot of that. Again, a lot of it happens in a car. However, it was very emotionally written, very well written, and so I found that at the end of the day, I actually didn't mind that. I think that it worked for this book and for me as a reader, so I was a little bit wary about it for that reason, but I did enjoy it. And again, I did a full arc review, which you can watch. I'm sure by this point in the video, I've long since run out of cards, and as a reminder, anything that I don't have in a card on the top of the video will be a link in the description. So finally hitting on some nonfiction I have not yet talked about in a supplemental video. After that, I read Insurgency, How Republicans Lost Their Party and Got Everything They Ever Wanted by Jeremy Peters. I am on a hunt to find something about the rise of the conservative movement within the Republican Party that is not the Rick Perlstein books that I've read, which are really, really excellent, but end with Reagan. And so this is a newer release that I thought might kind of bring me a little bit closer to what was happening within my lifetime. It was really interesting. It starts actually with Sarah Palin. Sarah Palin was brought really to national attention from being the governor of Alaska to being John McCain's vice president pick in 2008. I thought in the beginning that was a really weird place to start this book. I now understand the very clear line that the author was drawing from that. It was a lot of re-looking at things that I really wasn't paying attention to, or I was too young really to understand, through the guise of this, Palin to Trump continuum. It's not exactly what I wanted, but it certainly wasn't unworthwhile to read. I then read 3 romance novels in the Devil's Deal series by Eliza Reign. That was Lucifer's Curse, Fallen Feathers, and Wicked Hope. Essentially, in this one, a female character falls in love with the devil. Of course, the devil is not the evil character that she thinks he is. He's actually under a curse. He gave away his powers over the 7 sins, or most of them, and he has to get them back. It's a fairly standard romance series. I enjoyed it. I thought it was really, really funny. Eliza Reign has previously written some clean romances, and in this one it was billed as spicier, but the devil can't sleep with her without losing some of his powers, which would eventually kill him. So it's a very low on the explicit sex, though it is included fantasy romance. I then reread 2 books because I was reading an arc of the last book in the series. So the Hidden Legacy series by Alona Andrews is technically 6 books, but there's 3 from the point of view of one character and 3 from the point of view of her sister, continuing on the story. I reread the first 2 books in that latter Sisters series, so that's Sapphire Flames and Emerald Blaze, because I've got an arc of Ruby Fever, and it had been so long since I had read this series that I wanted to remind myself what had happened, because I really, really enjoyed the first 5 books when I read them. I found that my initial, memory of the series, that I really enjoyed it, was not incorrect. However, I have feelings about Ruby Fever, but I really don't want to go into it that much because this book is not published until August, and so you'll see my review later on. But if you're not familiar with the Hidden Legacies series, it is a paranormal slash magical fantasy contemporary romance. So the world is much like ours, except for there are magical families that rule much of, in this case, Texas politics. What I really like about the second series in particular is Catalina, her sister. It's much more politically involved. There's a big conspiracy. I mean, not that it didn't happen in the first series, I just think it's better. I then listened to Because Our Fathers Lied, a memoir of truth and family from Vietnam to Today by Craig McNamara. If that last name sounds familiar, that is because Craig McNamara is the son of Robert McNamara, who was the Secretary of Defense for JFK and LBJ and one of the main architects of the Vietnam War. This was again kind of like a whim. None of my other holds from the library are coming in book. It's a very fast read. Craig McNamara, I had no idea I've never really looked into him much, but I guess he's very politically active. He's incredibly liberal. And so needless to say, his father's politics and his own did not really jive. This book is very literary memoir. It is, yes, about Vietnam, but more of him struggling with his father's legacy and his relationship with his father. If you're looking for like anything history or whatever, you're not gonna find it here. So it's definitely, these are kind of the reasons I don't read memoir, the more literary, back and forth, weave and bob, like it doesn't really do much for me. So again, beautifully written, just not something I would normally read or particularly interested in. So I've been making some effort to work on my actual presidential biographies. And so I read The Jazz Age President, Defending Warren G. Harding by Ryan Walters. This is a new book on Warren G. Harding, which got me very excited because it's not often that happens. Warren G. Harding died in office. He was president for just about 2 years, right after Woodrow Wilson. He has a really, really bad reputation, which is why Ryan Walters wrote this book, Defending Warren Harding. I gave it 1 star. I did not enjoy it. There were so many problems with this, and I'm sure I'll get into it when I make my episode for this, but it was just not well written to the standards that I hold my nonfiction to. And also because it's so short, it's like basically under 200 pages after you get rid of all the back matter. And I hadn't read anything more expansive on Warren Harding. It was just like a lot of blanket statements and some yada yadaing and just clearly picking the pieces that worked with the argument. I did not like it. On the other side, I then read Martin Van Buren and the American Political System by Donald Cole to read my biography for Martin Van Buren. This book was published in the 1980s by an academic press. It is what it is. I would not recommend this book to anyone in terms of people looking for an interesting, fun nonfiction read. However, it must be said that this book is what I wanted in my Martin Van Buren biography, because Martin Van Buren is really one of the major reasons we have the political party setup that we have today. It was very dense. It was not fun to read, but it was giving me the critical information that I wanted, even though Donald Cole says he wasn't wishy-washy and then proceeds to show how he was indeed wishy-washy. Very recently, Michaela and I read together and published our joint review on Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. I feel like I don't need to even say anything about this. It's a graphic novel series that has recently, it was a web comic, now it's a graphic novel, and now it's also a show on Netflix about 2 boys in kind of high school. It's not set in America, it's set in England, I believe. But, one of them knows that he is gay, the other one is kind of coming to that realization. And it's just very cute, it's very sweet, and we have a whole joint review where we talk about it. I enjoyed it, but volume 1 is not much for content, which was very sad. Finally, I finished off June with The Devil You Know by Elizabeth O'Rourke. These are a series of 3 books in what I could call the devil. I don't know, there's not a series tag on Amazon Kindle Unlimited, but there are 3 books with Devil in the Deep Blue Sea, The Devil You Know, and these are just like sleeper books, I feel like, because they're contemporary romances, but I just feel like when I read them, there's an extra level of polish, an extra level of plot. I don't know what it is, but I just feel like they're just a little bit upper level for what I normally find in Kindle Unlimited. This third book is on two lawyers who work together and are completely at odds, so office enemies to lovers, and it was just really good. Like, they're fairly standard contemporary romance plots, but again, there's just something to Elizabeth O'Rourke's writing in this series. I haven't read anything else by her that just feels really like upper level, so I really enjoy that. All right, that is 78 books that I read in Q2. If you are still here, you are a boss. My camera had to overheat once. It's fine, we all got here eventually. If you have read any of these books or have any thoughts, leave me a note down in the comments, but otherwise, I'm gonna get out of here. Thanks, guys. Bye.